Welcome to the Black Women for Positive Change session on coding and robotics. Our presenter is Leah Cejas Brown, President of Elevated Lifestyles. Mrs. Brown is introduced by the Honorable Dawn S. Hester.
A middle school enrichment teacher and a high school mathematics and robotics teacher. Before transitioning to homeschooling her 3 babies. Yes, isn't that something? As a homeschool mom, Leah teaches her preschool and kindergarten children how to code and use tablets. She's going to share some knowledge with us today. She's
Thank you. That was quite the introduction. You know, as a mom with 3 little ones, they don't often speak so highly of you sometimes. It's just mom giving my cup or my juice or, but yes, I do have 3 children. I have a 19-month-old. I have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. My 5-year-old, he is actually in 1st grade. And so I did go ahead and start him on coding. I only attempted to introduce maybe 1 semester of coding to see how he would like it or take to it. And we ended up knocking 2 semesters out in the 1 because he really, really enjoyed it. So, you know, as a math person at heart, I was so excited. I was like, he may have part of me. He looks just like his father. So no one thinks I did anything, but he has my math brain and I love that about him. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen for the presentation. Just bear with me for a second. Alrighty. There we go. All right, can you guys see that?
No, it's not up yet. The share screen isn't connecting like we had it before.
All right, let's try that one more time because it's showing on my end. Okay. There you go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so robotics and coding, the future is now. You guys all sound like brilliant people, and I am just in awe and kind of like, whoa, what do I have to offer? So I'm just going to come at this from my years in the classroom and being a teacher and kind of how I see the impact on students and even my young man, and how I feel like it will help them. So let's go through some definitions. What is robotics? Robotics is a branch of engineering that involves the conception, design, manufacture, and operation of robotics. The objective of the robotics field is to create intelligent machines that can assist humans in a variety of ways. And so, yes, as a mom of little ones, I'm grateful for robotics, the technology, being able to program my coffee maker to have my coffee going for me first thing in the morning. So that's one less thing I have to do. I think a lot of us will admit we use a lot of technology, a lot of robotics in that way, just in our everyday life. But behind that, robotics is coding. And coding is the process of creating instructions for computers to follow. Simply, coding is the act of feeding commands to the computer in a language it can understand. The computer uses these commands to fulfill a task or a variety of tasks set by the person. So even before we can get into the robotics part of it, we have to get into kind of the language and what makes that robot work. Robotics and coding are essential skills for the future and are the keys to unlocking endless possibilities and creating a better future for us all. They teach problem solving, critical thinking, and creativity while preparing for a tech-driven world. So these are the main areas that I feel, why robotics, why could we or should we begin to start teaching this to our children, even at a young age. But it helps to enhance creativity and exploration. There's this immediate gratification, which I know can sound very like, oh no, that's not good, but it does have its place. Developing problem solving, it's important for the job field, job skills, office tools. And lastly, I see that it brings about a lot of teamwork. So let's really dive into that first bubble, creativity and exploration. One of the things that I loved, especially when teaching robotics and coding to my students at Norfolk State and my son, is that there were so many multiple routes to get to the same end result. And so one person may have decided, and this is the actual robot that I was teaching them to use. His name is Bolt. And one of the things that was fun was to see one group maybe decide that, hey, I could teach Bolt to go to the door by pressing these two commands. And another group would say, well, we just put it on repeat and he just kept going. But there were so many ways that they could all get to the same goal. If the goal was, hey, just let the robot get to the door, it took you have to do it this way, just like this, kind of the structure that a lot of students kind of resist or push back against. It just took it out of that and really allowed them to explore. And I personally am a firm believer that learning happens best through exploration. If I just sit there and tell you, this is how it is, and this is how it's always been, so therefore it needs to be that way, this generation is like, why? But why does it need to, but why should it be that way? And so it's just better sometimes to give them the room to let them figure those things out all by themselves, like without us having to, without using a textbook, without sitting down and drilling it into their head. And it's impactful and it leads to lasting results. They will always now have a direct connection with that material that they just learned, because they learned it in a way that worked for them, in a method that worked for them, and they broke it down in their heads in a way that applied to them. And so as a teacher who may be sitting in front of a classroom of so many different learning styles, it's actually quite helpful on my end, because I don't need to create a lesson that caters to my visual learner and then my hands-on learner, and then like all of these different types. They make these connections and results on their own. And so, for example, again, my son, he's on the younger side, but when we were coding, there was a coding block in there that said repeat. And he was like, well, I think that means to keep going. And I said, well, why do you think that it means that? And he said, well, because when I put it up there, the robot just kept going like this. So it just kept going and going. And I think repeat means to keep going. Well, now he'll always know that definition because he was able to see it and put it together himself. So I think that's the beauty about coding. It just opens the door to so much. And it's been amazing to see how the kids use that. So the second point is immediate gratification. Now, like I said before, there is a lot of times where people are like, we need to teach this generation patience. Stop being microwave children. It doesn't just happen like this. But in coding, it can. And the good part about that is along the way, they can program and they can kind of see the steps happen instantly, like, okay, let me start the program up. It starts going. Oh, we hit a glitch. However, the good side about that is they are more likely to keep going even when they hit the glitch, because they can see the little bit of progress. So maybe they fixed the glitch and it moved one step and they're like, that was perfect. Oh, but then it fell down. But they're still excited about the part that went well, and they're willing to figure out the next part. And so again, in the classroom, and even with my own son, who is very much in that stage of like, I just want to see it happen now. There was some frustration, but oddly enough, even by like the end of maybe a hard coding lesson, I would always offer like, hey, you want to take a break tomorrow? We can switch to do this other activity. And he'd be like, no, because I'm going to figure it out. And so even though it was frustrating, there was still this level of, there was enough good, like enough good gratification that, like, okay, let me keep going. Let me figure it out. And there was so much joy in all the kids when they got it, because they know their kinks. And those were the mistakes that they did not make next time, because they had to work through them. So it definitely teaches our kids to persevere longer than they naturally would. I think if I was to sit that same problem in front of them, let's just say we put it in terms of a word problem, I can almost bet money that those students are not going to keep going. They are going to get that word problem wrong, and that would be the end of it. But you put it in terms of coding, and all of a sudden they're like working on it for hours. So I do think there's a lot of positivity and character building that can happen by allowing them to explore with coding. And so there were so many life lessons that I was able to talk to my students about that transcended just the classroom experience, and it created a great bond because we were able to transition into life, and we were able to talk about like, yeah, like sometimes things are going to be hard. That is life. But you've learned that you can problem solve, that you can work around some of these things. And let's take another situation in life and apply that. So there was a lot of good crossover I found too, as I was teaching it. So the next thing is developing and problem solving, which I've already started to dive into a little bit. But this is such a needed skill. I'm a part of a lot of homeschool groups. I'm a part of a lot of mom groups. I am actually a mom blogger. And so some of the people that respond back to me often talk about, I just don't know how to get my child to problem solve. Like, they just do not want to think about it. They just want it done for them. And as a teacher, this was a problem that I saw so often in the classroom, and especially as a math teacher. And so that was always my end goal, that yes, passing the class, the grades is important, but if I can teach you at the end of the day to problem solve, that means so much more. That's the life skill that you need. And having the coding part of it definitely helped them to work through solving problems and being able to see the problem and identify the problem and put steps to it. And so we would often say, okay, let's see the problem. What is it that we see? Okay, we see that the robot is turning left when it should be turning right. And okay, so now that we see the problem, we've identified the problem, what's one change that we could do to fix it? And just keeping this momentum of we keep moving forward, we keep thinking. And I really found that it was very helpful for my students to be able to assess and address the issues in real time and make forward movement. And I think that is very important. This generation has so many great ideas, of so many things that they want to do, but just their inability to problem solve sometimes and to push through stops them. And so we can help give them some of those skills that they can learn even through coding. I know classroom teachers, speaking from experience, would be really grateful, but it is really a necessary skill and one that coding would solve, especially if we were able to get it into the classrooms earlier or just start exposing our children to it earlier. They're exposed to so much technology anyway. So being able to have technology that was also teaching a lot of important lessons along the way, I think is very important. So this next area, job field, job skills, and office tools. Speaking about coding and robotics specifically, it is such a broad topic, and it's such an evolving field. There's so many different avenues, and there's always jobs. There will always be a job listing for someone who knows how to code or who knows how to do something with technology. Because it's always changing and it's always evolving, and there's always new ideas and new shortcuts on how to do things. And so if the kids can have this background and really develop a love for it, it is something that they can turn into a job. They can go to school for, they can learn, but there's so many even free things out there for them to use to even kind of get their feet wet with coding and seeing if it's an interest of theirs. Being able to code and understand just that language of coding is very helpful with job skills, with problem solving, with being able to be innovative, with time management, with organization. You know, some of my students, they may have come to class late, and while they were super excited about the lesson in coding, it takes time. And so I remember one student in particular, I was like, you love this, you're very good at it, but you need the time to work it out. And so you got to get to class on time. And it all of a sudden became this incentive. Like, if I want to see the end goal, if I want to see my robot do what it's supposed to do, I've got to put in the time, and I've got to get there on time to be able to program it and see the success that my classmates are seeing. And I hope, you know, as a teacher, that will be a skill he takes to the workplace. Like, I need time to do my work. I want my job. I need to get there on time. I need to be organized with my steps on how we solved it, so that I can either reproduce it or allow that piece of code to transition to something else. So I just found that it helps to create a very well-rounded student and individual. And office tools. It was very interesting when I walked in to teach this class at Norfolk State. For our particular robot, they needed to be on a hardwired computer. And it was quite astounding because I don't consider myself to be extremely old at all. I thought, you know, I can fit in with the best of them. And they were just looking at the computer. Like, it was just, they had no idea what it was. They're looking at the keyboard. And you know, there was an error message that like popped up when you log on. And we all know you just click the little X. And so I'm in the front of the room saying, hey, just click the X and it'll take you. And I see students like hitting the X on the keyboard or trying to use their finger to touch it. And I realized, I'm like, wow, we have to go all the way back to the basics. Like, this is the computer screen and this is the monitor. And but that's something they would need to know. If they go to an office, they may have a hardwired computer, or they may have an actual laptop, not a cell phone. And for many of them, they hadn't really experienced technology outside of a phone.
Okay.
So,
We want to take some questions, so keep on moving. This is great.
oh, okay, no problem. And so it was just mind-boggling, like, wow, had you not signed up to take this coding class, you wouldn't have learned just some basic computer skills and how to use the computer, a laptop, even an iPad. Um, and it was good to start giving them that skill, that exposure, because for whatever reason, office tools are scary. Dr. Myers sent me an article about just an actual fear that this new generation has of seeing like a copier or a printer or a fax machine. So hopefully with coding, we can start to remove some of that fear. Um, and coding, coding is so much easier. Let me just say that it's so much easier than what it was when I had to take coding classes. I had to learn C++, and that was the actual language, and we were doing the semicolons, and you had to make sure it was correct amount of spaces, and it just, was not the class we loved the most, us math people. But coding now, a lot of it has transitioned into block coding. And I was speaking to a friend of mine who does huge engineering software. And he was like, yeah, we've even switched to block coding. And if you're not familiar with it, block coding basically is just a block, and it has a name on it, and it may say start. And so if you want to start building it, you choose the start block and you put it on the screen. And then you click another one, kind of like Legos or building blocks. You click the next one under there, and maybe that next one says move 3 times. So then you put that move 3 times button up there, and you press start, it says start, it moves 3 times. That's all it is. But behind that, there is other coding language, and they are able to see. So for instance, my son built the code all with blocks, and then we could switch over to JavaScript and I believe Python, and he could see all the like computer language that was behind it, which he thought was super cool. But it is a lot more accessible now for anyone to kind of get involved. You don't have to know a whole lot to get started. And the last one is just teamwork. So a lot of the times now when you are given a project to do, you need to build something, you work with other people. And I think in a world where we can often be very I and individual and just focused on self, the skills of being able to work with people, to work with a diverse group of people is not often there. And so coding, because it is such a universal language that so many people are getting into, you're going to be working with people with different languages and background and ages. And so coding takes something and unifies a diverse group of people across multi-disciplines. And that I think is just really cool because it brings about so many different perspectives. Sometimes, more heads are better than one just to tackle the problem. And that's definitely what we found, because I had a great mix of students that signed up to learn about robotics, and they just to kind of hear some of the little conversations they had. For instance, one of the assignments was to take our little robot, and he had to go play golf for the day. So they had to program him to hit the first hole. So we set different points up in the classroom. So he had to hit the first hole, and then he had to move to the second hole and the third hole. Well, I had a African-American student who was like, I don't know what golfing is. And then I had another student and he was like, oh, my dad goes golfing all the time. And he was Asian. And he was like, well, can you explain to me the concept? Like, he just didn't even understand like the concept of golf, but it allowed them to talk and to learn something about each other. And they, now one student understands what golf is, that that's a sport, that it even exists, that people play this. And they got to work together then to achieve the goal. But that happens a lot across coding. You're going to meet new people and experience new things. So applications of robotics and coding. Robotics and coding can be used to solve real world problems. Learning robotics and coding promotes critical thinking and problem solving skills. Robotics and coding are essential for future job opportunities. So here's just a quick study, and it shows just the various age groups that you can see that students are starting to pick up programming. And so 8.9% are younger than 10 years old. Your largest range was from 14 to 15 years, and so on. But it really does hit like a target demographic. They're very into it. Again, my son would have been in the younger than 10 years, but it's everywhere. He's starting to understand how his technology works a little bit more. And there are YouTubers, kids who make these codes, and it's everywhere. It is pretty astounding to see. But here's just, a chart to show.
Okay, we want to open this up for discussion and questions. So
Sure.
people want to ask you some questions.
Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Well, okay. All righty. Okay, good. Well, good presentation. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Comments, questions? Barbara, you're on mute. Come off of mute.
A lot of questions. I'm gonna start with a basic one. I saw at MIT how they were programming this robot, and it was about, I say, 50 or 60 codes just in the hand. So here you are. You come into your room, your classroom, and what do you see? You see a computer, and you see a robot structure, or who is making the robot?
Engineers. So the actual designing of the robot, it's going to be two fields working together to build the parts. So an engineer may be able to build it, but to get it to do what you want it to do, that's going to be the coding behind it.
And those are algorithms.
So for
Algorithms.
instance, this is my robot. I did not build this. But in order for me to do what it needs to do, then I have to create the code for him to start doing what it says. So I'm the one that gives him the directions and the language. So right now I'm moving him. I just have it on free range, but he's going crazy there.
Yeah, I have some more questions. There's a little bit, well, let me start. There's a fear right now that artificial intelligence, which involves robotics, are getting out of control, that some of the new tools, and I suppose coding is behind this too, that they're going rogue, that they're not going to do what they're programmed to do, but they're going to do what they want to do. Do you see that as a possibility? And how does that happen?
So that, because I would say that I'm probably more on in the classroom, other side of it. I don't know that I'm, that may be a little bit more above me. I think with anything, there's always going to be an evil. I think with anything that's good, there's always something that's bad that could be right there behind it. As far as it taking over and doing its own thing, I would say if that was to happen, the coding that went behind it had to already be very, very intelligent to work on its own. But with coding, you have to tell it what to do. It doesn't just wake up on its own to start, to start working. So even with my coffee maker, for, if you wanted to consider that a robot, I still have to tell it, hey, at 5 o'clock, start brewing my coffee.
Yeah,
But it
I can
won't-
understand
Okay,
that.
Reverend Reynolds, we've got a couple of other questions. Dr.
Okay.
Dunstan's got her hand up and Gloria Dulon has hers up, and then we'll come back around to you. Dr. Dunstan?
Okay, just one quick question, and then the comment. First of all, thank you, Leah. By the way, how do you pronounce your first part of your name?
Cejas.
Cejas.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, thank you for a very, very informative and inspiring talk. You and mine have addressed the question we were talking about that I think is missing and needed in our academy discussion that really Dr. Reynolds brought to the table here. And I just wanted to mention that and ask you your opinion for this, because you told us, for example, the robots follow instructions, but you have to have the instruction. Dr. Reynolds brought in artificial intelligence. And I just wanted to say that one of the things that certainly needs to be addressed is what kinds of programs can be developed for robots to carry out, and what is the values of the programmers, the one who's developing the programs, and the possibility, could you actually develop a program that becomes smarter than the programmer? But
Yeah.
those are issues.
Those are good questions. Let's let her answer those.
But wait a minute, let me say that. Oh, sure. Don't answer that. My question was simply, what's the difference between an intelligent machine and a smart machine?
I would say they're fairly the same. I think I would have to go to Google and look up what is the actual definition. And I'm not, I tell my kids all the time, hey, we have Google, feel free to use it. But as far as something that's smart or anything that is considered smart, it's the level of capabilities that it has to perform a task and to do a task. So for instance, your cell phone, in many senses, it can take your heart rate, it can capture, tools that are right in your doctor's office. That is definitely considered a smart device. As you get into AI, that uses a lot of things that, for instance, like with fingerprinting, that is a very human thing. We all have our own individual fingerprints, where sometimes it crosses over into AI, is where it starts to take on some of those traits to create like face recognition on your cell phone, being able to identify key points in you to then do something. So I see these key points in your face, therefore it's you, therefore I unlock your phone. So I think that begins to get more into the AI, being able to talk to Siri or Alexa, that gets more into the AI. But again, all of those responses that Alexa or Siri has already been programmed by someone. So basically there's code behind it. If you say, hey, Alexa, then your device says, okay, this is the response that you give back. And then you listen and it picks up on key phrases. But all of that stuff has already been programmed. So it seems artificial because it's not a real person talking to you. However, they're responding to you as if it was a real person that's talking to you. Still, it's just a smart device that has good coding.
Thank you.
Hey, Gloria, did you have a question? Gloria? Okay, Reverend Reynolds, I think you had
Yeah, I
another.
got a lot of questions, but I'll try to control myself. This is such an interesting discussion that it's just, once again, I just think it's a great presentation. Now, I've heard people say you should learn coding. Then I've heard people say you shouldn't learn coding. And I just want to know who should learn coding and who should not.
I say if you have time, why not? To learn something new is always good. To keep evolving is always good. So why not learn something? Why not learn coding? Especially if you, for instance, I will be launching my my business this weekend, and I needed my website. But because I understand coding, I was able to create my own website. Therefore, I saved a good amount of money and did not have to hire someone else to do that. So why not learn coding?
Well, I saw on that chart, it was very interesting. You talked about the ages of who's coding, and you got to 30. And I'm saying, wow, does the brain stop there? I'm 80. I didn't see any 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80 people. I saw 1% at 30.
They're just not checking for us, Barbara. That's all. But they're not checking for us. The thing about it is that you don't forget, America is the capital of ageism. Okay, they used to have a thing about never trusting anybody over 30, so they still try to write us off, and then they turn around and find out that we still have all the information that they'll never ever figure out. I was looking on my other screen. I'm sorry. I used to work with a Japanese firm for 4 years, and their kids start learning coding in preschool at the age of 3.
Wow.
They make their own robots fully functioning by the time they're 5 and 6. They're already programming them and moving into the next whatever. I'm glad that our kids are getting it, but competing with the rest of the world, I'm talking about the developed world right now, and even the so-called non-developed world is learning more about coding, because once they get their hands on cell phones, a whole other thing happens. That then once they understand it and master it, they start propelling themselves into whatever you would want to call cyberspace. I studied a class in 1965 called Psycho-Cybernetics by Maltz that predicted this. This has been in the works probably before Robbie the Robot. And there are those of us old enough or young enough to remember watching Robbie the Robot and all the other stuff on TV. These things have been in the works. And what they did was they had already selected who was going to learn it. The thing is, now we have an opportunity to get our kids involved. And as somebody used to say, we need to do it at all deliberate speed. But we also have to understand that we need to know it as much as they too do, because it's not going to go away. And the less we know, the more they can manipulate our environment against us.
Good point.
And that's the reason why it's important. Now, the issue is, who do we get to teach us, and how do we get to the point where we don't feel bad if we don't grasp everything immediately or initially? Because I'm looking at some of the most brilliant women on the planet right here on the screen. So it may not have been something that was in our particular curriculum when we were coming up, but it's not something that we can't learn.
Right.
Well, that's why we're having this session tonight, Gloria, because you said, what about the Gen Zs? What about us?
Yeah,
So
well,
that's
I'm
why we're
telling you
having
right
this
now,
session.
America is so far behind. Some of us deliver it. Some of it is that they're sectioning out who they want, who their elite group is going to be, who they want to have learn. Wait, Sylvia, why are you upside down? This is driving me nuts.
I don't know.
We told you, Sylvia.
Thank
Thank you for saying what I was thinking.
Okay, I've got a question while you are for her.
Is that why you're upside down?
Yes. Shame on you. I've got a question. Black boys tend to be placed in special ed more than any other race.
Mhm.
But what I have found out in my experience, because I did a year trailing behind the associate superintendent for TEA, that was for special ed.
Mhm.
In every state, there is a preponderance, I know in Texas, of Black boys in special education. And we found out that they tend to learn faster. I found out when I was teaching them. So my question is, how can we get it to that one aspect of our race?
Mm.
Because they pick up on so much, so fast,
Mhm.
and they use it the wrong way. And so my question is, that's an area that we tend to overlook. And that's an area that needs our help the most.
Mhm.
Good comment. Leah, what do you think? How do we get to the special ed kids?
Not especially ed, but just Black young boys. They
Yeah.
don't all need to bounce a ball. They can use that to learn coding and all of that.
Mhm.
When
Yeah.
I did my
Um,
dissertation, we had to learn to write code.
Mhm.
Okay, let her respond, Sylvia.
Okay.
So interesting enough, I actually was having this discussion with some mom friends of mine, all of us raising little Black boys, but even, taking it one step further, classrooms are not designed for boys in general, and they're definitely not designed for Black boys. They are designed for females and for females to thrive. It is sit down, take your notes, listen to the teacher, follow instructions. And so it was always my passion. I wanted a classroom only of boys because they just think differently and they have so much energy. And so when I did have my classroom of boys, while I may be teaching math, I would just stand on their desk. Not because it had anything to do with the lesson, but it just diverted their attention and it kept them focused and engaged. And we would take brain breaks and we would play games because that's what they need. And even with my son, he needs just spontaneous activity and just kind of, let's go here. And it looks very chaotic from the person walking in, but it's very controlled chaos. So I think that's the first step. We've got to change the classroom design. It's terrible. It's not allowing them to thrive. But then once you get past that, and if you're able to change that, I think our Black boys have to know that it's possible. So one of the things that my son knows is that, I don't know if any of you guys know him, but Silas Adekunle, he is one of the highest paid African-American Black boys who does robotics engineer.
What's the name again, Leah? What's the name again?
Silas Adekunle. And so
just send it to us.
And so my son, he says, like when he would finish his code, he'd be like, see, mommy, I'm just like Silas. And he said it like that's his friend. Like I'm like Silas. This is what we do. Because he was able to see it. We read about it. We talked about it. And they have to know that that's possible and that someone who looks like them has done that.
Yeah.
And
That's
then we just have to
that's Reverend Reynolds' slogan. Reverend Reynolds' slogan, if you can see it, you can be it. And you're giving an example exactly of that.
Remember Black men. That was their slogan.
I think, and then they just have to be exposed. It is not something that's always taught in the classrooms. And I think if we were just to expose them, they would be hooked on it. It's like, they look like little adrenaline, like once they see it, he's like, let me put it together. And like, they're just so excited.
Yeah.
I think we just have to show it to them and not be afraid to. Like I said before, there's so many free activities for them to do. The 2 semesters I taught him, it was free. I didn't pay for that coding class or anything. We just have to show it to them and let them kind of play around on it. And I guarantee you they will figure it out and then come show you. And now you can learn it too.
Yeah. There you go.
There are some scientists who say about the year 2040 that robots, we will be more robotic than human, and that they eventually, because of the way that artificial intelligence is so exponentially expanding and using more computer power, can you see the kind of changes that some of the sciences are pointing to there? Say there's going to be a competition where the next human species will be more genetically engineered or robotically controlled. Can you see robotics taking on, because they are doing some great, wonderful things. If you call it wonderful, in Japan, going back to Japan, they're starting this robot sex, because some men are marrying their robots. They're trying to see if they can make robot sex legal in Japan. So this is such an expanding field in almost every
that only America would focus on, nobody else. They focus on the lowest common denominator. They wouldn't talk about all the positive things, but robot sex is because America still doesn't understand the name of this, just like they don't understand that we are the 27th in medicine and medical healing and medical knowledge, America. This is why we pay more in prescriptions and get less healing, because we're still stuck on having big pharma in our back pockets, because they're not really interested in doing anything but advancing the dollars, not advancing the human beings. But yeah, I saw that whole thing about that. So while they were talking about all that, everybody was missing the point of what was really going on with AI. And Japanese have been using AI because Japanese people live longer than anybody else in the world. The average age of a Japanese person in terms of old age is somewhere between 103 and 109. They didn't even talk about that. They just want to deal with the most salacious part of it, but not why you have a robot who has your daughter's face on it because she died long before you did, to come and talk to you while you're in the hospital so that you're not neglected, okay? Or during COVID, they were able to use the AI to help when they had overwhelming numbers of people in the hospital, and had human faces on like a computer screen so that you weren't really looking at a robot and you were talking to people. They don't ever tell you that part. They just give you the most salacious part of it. And then America sits up here and laughs while the rest of the world is moving forward, getting things done. The thing that irks me about AI, and then I'm going to stop, whenever I call Amazon and that dadgum automaton answers that phone and says to me, oh, I can solve your problems. You can talk to me just like I'm a human being. And he knows, and I know, there is no way on this planet that can solve a thing that I need, and I cannot talk to it like a human being because it simply does not have that capacity. AI is supposed to be a tool. It's not supposed to take over. We're supposed to manipulate it. And that's one of the things that we really have to really understand, because the rest of the world wants to use AI to manipulate us.
Absolutely. Well, this is
when you get into employment, because there's going to be thousands and thousands of robots. I want to make sure I'm talking about humanoids, those who look like, talk like us, even being programmed to think like us. And they're coming into the employment field, and it's going to be a great competition. I call it replacement robotics, because they are going to replace people who would have normal, usual skills, and they replace us, because what this society has always wanted was slaves. And a robot is not going to join a union, not going to go to lunch. And who's going to be pushed out? We are. That's one of the reasons why we're insisting that we learn coding, we learn it all, because if you are replaced, where are you going to be replaced to? So that's
Psycho-cybernetics.
This has been an exciting conversation, and we
talks about that whole thing. I'm just telling you, if you get the book, it's still in print. Read it. It talks about that whole thing that you're talking about now.
Yeah,
that's
a good book.
So we try to stay within an hour, and Dawn and a couple of our members are having to get off. But Dawn, did you have any remarks before you have to go? Are you still with us? I know she's got a number of different things happening. Dawn?
I'm still here.
Okay, did you
And
have any
I-
comments or questions you want to pop in before you have to go?
No, I just want to thank Leah for her presentation and for helping us to think outside of what we knew how to think, and to broaden our perspective so that we can do a better job, not only in planning our academy, but in what we can advocate
Yeah.
for our young people and really for all of us.
Yeah.
Because, coding seems like it's
Yes.
out of my realm, but then I have to be smart enough to realize that if a 6-year-old can do it, Dawn is 7.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. And it's good to see you.
Thank you for watching. Take care